So what we do is we try our best to come up with the principles of how to redistrict. And those principles are, for instance, try to get a community that thinks alike, like Egan, in the same district as Burnsville should be in the same district. And let's not have people have to go across the river, because people across the river don't maybe think the same way as Burnsville does. So we try to put those kinds of principles together, and then along with trying not to favor one party or another, not to favor one sitting legislator or another. But where the problem comes with politics is that the politics uses those principles for their own benefit. And that's where the politics come in, and that's where we try to come up with a mechanism that doesn't allow the politics to lead us to a particular end result. And that's one of the things that has been good in Minnesota, is that we've had divided government. We've had a governor that's been from a different party than the legislature, or we've had a House that's been a different party, from the Senate. So we always had that disagreement, and that pushed it towards the courts. And I think we've been very lucky to not have the kind of political gerrymandering or politically using these principles to come up with the districts. So it's not the politics that are leading it, it's the politics that are using it. If that helps a little bit with answering your question.
All right, if you don't mind introducing yourself and asking your question.
I'm Hal Rainey. I live in Burnsville, Precinct 10, which puts me in Senate District 51. You hinted at the statutory limits for, in the answer to the previous question. That's what I was going to ask about. But my second question, after the maps are drawn, what kinds of challenges can be brought against them, and by whom?
Well, I guess maybe I'll do that. That's a very good question, and it are you going to do a constitutional amendment, or are you going to do an advisory committee? That's where the rubber hits the road, because if you do an advisory committee, it has to go back to the legislature. And if the legislature doesn't do it, or does it in a bad way, somebody's going to challenge it, and it's going to come to the court. If the people, by amending the fundamental of the Constitution, they transfer their sovereignty basically to a redistricting commission, the basis for a challenge will be very narrow, but it could go to the courts. And so everything would be subject to, because the courts, Marbury versus Madison, going way back to John Marshall, the courts will interpret the Constitution, but it would be a very narrow review of what that constitutionally constituted redistricting commission did, because the people have transferred their sovereignty to it. If they dotted the I's, crossed the T, the court won't do anything with it. If it's an advisory commission, hey, it's jump ball. And you can, they can ignore the advisory commission, it can be partisan or whatever. So every case is subject to a challenge, but one system will be more subject to challenge than the other.
Thank you. Go ahead, next question.
Hi, I'm Andrew Wilson. I'm the visibility coordinator with the league, and we have a question that was submitted to us before the forum by email. I know you've already touched on this a little bit, but here goes. During redistricting, after the 2010 census, some suburban cities with less than 40,000 residents were divided into more than one House district. The pro is those cities now have more than one representative, and the con is that in some cases the district only contains a small fraction of the city's population. Those people may be left behind. So should municipal boundaries and not putting a small fraction of the city's residents into a House district be considered during the next redistricting process? And just to give you a couple examples, I looked at a couple maps, and for example, Mendota Heights and Cottage Grove are split up into two House districts, and South St. Paul and Oakdale are actually split up into two different Senate districts. Thanks.
That's a very good question. I think this kind of gets back to the first question as well, is what principles do you use, and how closely are you wedded to those principles? They are values statements, but there are also other things to take into consideration. Go down one more level, and school district boundaries also are part of that conversation as well. And so that's something else that gets considered when you look at the way that the local maps will be drawn. So I do think that that's extremely important. And Senator Carlson talked about it as folks who think alike. But there actually is something to geographic boundaries in terms of what needs different communities have. And I'll very often say in the House, there are moments in the House where the Dakota County delegation, regardless of party, knows the south of the river and knows when south of the river is not getting our fair shake. And we come together and do vote as a block because geographically and economically, there are some things that really unite us in this part of the state. And so those types of boundaries are important. Do I think that they're the only boundary that matters? They're not, and they frankly can't be because of things, like I said, like school district boundaries. So that would be my short answer to that.
I'm going to tell you flat out, in both the 2000 and 2010, keeping in centers of interest like cities, school boards, and that together was a criteria that the 5-judge panel followed. I know for a fact Judge Kalatowski from the Court of Appeals was on that 5-judge panel. It was his suggestion that that panel travel and hold hearings throughout the state to see how the people wanted to be just. One of the main messages they got back, don't divide our city. Rochester was kind of all split up and said, no, keep our city together. So it's not going to be perfect, and you're always going to find some example in order to make it. But I will tell you flat out, look in the court order, and you're going to see it. That was a criteria that the redistricting panel of judges tried to follow because that was a loud message that they heard all across the state of Minnesota.
And it is in our current legislation that's being proposed as well.
And it should be
there.
And
it absolutely should be. Egan proud, Burnsville proud, right?
Thank you very much. Next question.
Rob Schumer, Burnsville. Hi. You're talking about a lot of abstractions in terms of how these systems come together, and my question is, are there states or other countries that you would consider to be kind of ideal in developing a redistricting plan, and who are the people who participate in these, quote, more ideal models?
how? I mean, redistricting, hey, I like Australia. I mean, you're required, you get fined if you don't vote. I mean, I am so adamant with respect to the fact that the sovereignty rests with the people. I'm not going to give you a pass for not voting. You know, one of the things to do, you know, all of this political advertising that's going on, you know how much of that is oriented to get voters to say a pox on both houses? I don't want to vote because I don't like either. Hey, there are ads that are designed to have you self-disenfranchise. I think that our campaign advertising, whatever, will change if, in fact, they know that everybody's going to have to get out there and vote. So they're going to try and convince you to vote and to vote for them, and instead of trying to convince you not to vote so that they can energize their own base. So I like that. I mean, that's a little bit far from what you're saying, but okay. There are some people who are in this redistricting things, we have to follow California. You know, California's got a commission, Arizona's got a commission. You know, there's a book that follows the Coleman-Franken races. The title of it is "This Is Not Florida," and that's quoting me because the attorney for Coleman got up and was telling about how Minnesota is screwing up. We're just like Florida. And I didn't want to ask the question, but where I stopped him is that, no, this is not Florida, sir. This happened in Minnesota. We want you to argue a case in Minnesota. We should look to other states to see how they've done it. But I'll tell you as a fact that Minnesota has a reputation of doing it better. And I have a lot of trust and confidence in Minnesota's representatives and senators. You're going to get it right. You'll look to other states. But, you know, a lot of states look to us, actually. because Minnesota, Senator Cohen was on a redistricting panel, and he was ready to speak. Well, in Minnesota, and the rest of the panel said, hey, come on, you're Minnesota, you do it so differently. Your experience isn't relevant to us. So we're going to do it our way here in Minnesota, and we're going to be a model and do it right.
And I would say they are looking at Minnesota. The other states, the other countries do it, I'm not sure. And you know, Minnesota is the only state in the nation that has a divided legislature. And it's only divided by a few seats. So we have Republicans that are in the majority in the Senate, we have Democrats that are in the majority of the House, and there are only a few seats different. And to me, that means that the redistricting has been fair and balanced and done very well. So I think they look at us.
So part of the question was, what are the characteristics of the people, other than politicians, if you were developing an ideal setting, who should participate in doing an honest and fair redistricting? What kind of people should you bring to the table that can make those decisions?
We have somebody in the audience that's very interested in how the decision makers would answer that question, so I'm not going to answer it. How are you going to give up my seat? What?
I'll gladly give up my seat.
We're gonna take one more question after this. If you guys want to respond to that, you can do it quickly. Otherwise,
I can take one more question.
Probably
okay.
kind of goes to that. I'm Karen Gallagher. I live in Egan, the one precinct of Egan that you guys don't represent, so that's kind of an odd situation. And I've been following redistricting, and I'm a firm believer in that the voters, we the people, are supposed to have a lot of input on things, especially when it comes to voting. That legislators shouldn't be picking their voters, we should be picking our legislators. So I really appreciate Representative Halverson, what you said about that, that you need to earn our votes. So I guess I'm concerned because I know that in the bill you co-sponsored, there was a large group of people, just everyday people, that could be on the commission along with retired judges, so that the whole state could be represented in a meaningful way. And I guess I'm concerned if we're just going to go to a constitutional amendment, how that's going to work, especially because we're in such a tight timeline. And if the constitutional amendment doesn't get passed, then we're stuck with the same system we have, and we don't have more people really having input into how these lines are drawn. And we know that those lines can affect so many services and representation and everything. So I kind of like your opinions on that.
We're running low on time, so if we can have quick answers, that would be great. Thank you so much for your question.
Well, quickly, practically, like I said, the bill that's moving is actually legislation, not a constitutional amendment. All that stuff is still on the table. We have not adjourned sine die, so there's a lot of legislature left. Lots of different things can happen. The Senate has to do their work on this as well, and so I would say that I agree that having members of the community be part of this conversation is going to be extremely important, no matter what ends up getting passed at the legislature. And you're right, time is not on our side. So we have to be
I'm going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
I've been there. I've done it on the court for 2 different decades. I mean, the court's panel didn't get started on work till June 1 of 2011. There will be time, folks. There will be time. If you enact an amendment in 2020, you can put together a commission. I don't favor a terribly large commission.
And I'm going to just quickly
Yeah.
jump in because we actually have just run out of time.
Okay. So, no, it's not a big issue. We can do it, folks.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone that's come, and thank you very much to our panelists and for our stand-in panelist, Jim Carlson.